Finally, with the end of the livestream, we also get the confirmation of all the upcoming units' kits, and that they won't be altered drastically after this. And that calls for a full build guide on the upcoming units. And we start off with Feixiao. As usual, we first go through a brief explanation of her kit, followed by her Eidolons, then some build options, proper rotations, and finally synergies. So leave a like if you find this video helpful, and let's get started. So first, an overview. Feixiao is a 5-star wind unit following the path of Hunt. She has some similarities with Akron, as she also has a unique energy mechanic just like her, and by that fact, she's also a unit whose main source of damage is her ultimate. She has pretty consistent damage output and is focused around follow-up attack playstyle. Looking at her base stats, as a Hunt unit, she has pretty low HP and defense. Her attack also seems to be on the lower end. She has 112 speed, making her the second fastest unit in HSR after Zila. And as I said earlier, she has a unique energy mechanic, as instead of normal energy, she needs stacks, and she can hold up to 12 of them. Moving on to her traces, her basic attack is a single target hit, dealing wind damage to the target. Feixiao's skill, War Axe, deals wind damage to a single target as expected, and then launches a follow-up attack from her talent. Now to understand this, let's move on to her talent, Thunder Hunt. Feixiao can use her ultimate when she reaches 6 points of Flying Aureus, and she can hold up to 12 points in total. So you can actually time this and activate her ultimate 2 times back to back, kinda similar to Yunli. Feixiao gains 1 point of Flying Aureus for every 2 attacks from her allies, and Feixiao's own attacks also counts in this, but except for her ultimate. Now given she wants constant attacks on the enemies to gain points, she plays real well with follow-up attack units. Also, after any of Feixiao's teammates attack the enemy, Feixiao immediately launches a follow-up attack dealing wind damage to a single target. And this is the same follow-up attack that she triggers from her skill. Now this follow-up attack can only trigger once per Feixiao's turn, not the skill one, that is separate, only the talent one. And it's kinda similar to Kafka's follow-up attack. Also, after she launches the follow-up attack, she increases her damage by 60% for 2 turns. And since she can use her follow-up attack every turn, you pretty much have a 100% uptime on the 60% damage boost for all her attacks. Now for Feixiao's ultimate, Terra Split. Now there are a lot of points to this, so pay attention. First, when using her ultimate on a target, if the target is not on its weakness broken state, then Feixiao's weakness break efficiency gets increased by 100%. Which is actually pretty cool, allowing her to break those bosses pretty quickly. As for the damage, she in total deals 7 single target hits on the target. And for the first 6 hits, you can actually choose the target and the attack. Feixiao has 2 types of ultimate hits, both Thunder Blitz and War Axe Skyward. Both deal the same amount of damage, but also have some extra damage boost depending on the enemy being weakness broken or not. Both Thunder Blitz deals 30% more damage if the target is weakness broken, and War Axe Skyward does the same if the enemy is not weakness broken. And this is pretty cool. Since we can choose the attacks, we can switch between them if we end up breaking the target in the middle of her ultimate. And finally, after dealing 6 such hits, she finishes off with the 7th hit, also dealing wind damage to a single target. Lastly, for her technique, it's actually pretty cool. She enters this really unique state for 20 seconds, where she makes a vortex and pulls in nearby enemies. Her movement speed is increased, and after entering battle, she gains 1 Flying Aureus point and deals wind damage to the enemies. This damage is for sure to crit, and depending on the number of enemies she sucked into her vortex, it increases that attack's crit damage by 100% for each enemy, maxing out at 1000 crit damage, meaning she can at least suck 10 enemies into her vortex. It's gonna be a really fun ability to try. In terms of her trace priority, her ultimate and her talent are going to be her main source of damage, so level those up first, followed by her skill, which may not contribute that much, but is still something. Lastly, you can leave her basics at level 1, as you won't be using it ever, but as a damage dealer, I highly recommend fully maxing her out. Now let's look at her passives. Her first passive, Heaven Path, grant her 3 Flying Aureus point at the start of the battle. Also, at the start of her turn, if no follow-up attack from her talent is triggered in her previous turn, then this turn will automatically count as an attack towards her Flying Aureus stacks. Now this can be confusing, but basically, if none of her allies attack the enemy, and you waste the follow-up attack in that turn, the next time she takes turn, that turn will count as an attack. Means she only needs 1 more attack to get 1 point of Flying Aureus. Her second passive, Form Shift, allows her ultimate to be considered a follow-up attack, and also increase the crit damage of her follow-up attacks by 36%. It's a nice crit damage boost, which can be super helpful, as you'll be building her with super high crit rate, and you might not have enough crit damage, but this passive helps with that. Lastly, her third passive, Bolt Catch, simply increases Feixiao's attack by a whopping 48% for 3 turns, after using her skill, which is basically always, because as a damage dealer, you prioritize using her skill, and her skill also triggers a follow-up attack, all the more reasons to constantly use her skill, meaning this buff remaining active all the time. Damn, she does get a lot of self buffs in her kit. As for her bonus stats, after maxing out her traces, Feixiao gets 28% attack, 12% crit rate, and 12.5% defense. If my memory is correct, this used to be wind damage. Maybe. I don't know why they decided to give her defense. Moving on to Feixiao's Eidolons. Well, given how popular she is, some of you guys may already be planning to go for a few extra copies. So let's see if they are worth it. Feixiao's E1 makes it so that after launching either of her ultimate hits, her ultimate deals 10% extra of the original damage. And this can stack up to 5 times, so at max stacks is 50%. And you can stack it up easily, as the ultimate has 6 hits. So by the time you reach the 6th hit, the damage increase will be at max 5 stacks. Now one more thing to notice here is that the wording here is 10% extra of the original damage, which is similar to Acheron's passive, meaning it's not a simple damage boost multiplier. This multiplier takes the final damage output and then adds 10% extra to it. This is exactly why Acheron's damage increase from her passive matters so much. And if you don't understand this, it's basically a bigger damage increase than your standard damage boost. Her E2 gives her 1 flying Aureus point for every follow-up attack from her allies, and this caps at 6 points per turn. Now this actually makes follow-up attack units like Topaz and Aventurine shoots up in value, because now you don't need 2 attacks, just 1 follow-up attack from her allies, and she gets a point. With this and a Topaz or any other follow-up attack unit, with Aventurine, she can potentially get her ultimate back every turn, resulting in a huge damage increase. Her E3 and E5 increase the level of her traces. Feixiao's E4 increases the toughness reduction of her follow-up attack by 100%, so it goes from 10 to 20, and for a single target hit, it's not that much of a difference, but it's still pretty good. But she also gets an 8% speed increase for 2 turns after she launches a follow-up attack, and this can be awesome, as with this you pretty much have an always active 8% speed buff. And finally her E6 increases her ultimate rest penetration by 20%, and all her follow-up attacks are now considered ultimate damage, and their multiplier is increased by 140%, as expected from an E6. It's a massive damage increase. Not only that, since now all her follow-up attacks are considered ultimate damage, meaning any ultimate damage from her relics or Lightcones will affect her follow-up attacks as well, opening up a lot more options in terms of builds, which is always nice. Overall, even though all her Eidolons increase her damage by a good enough amount, it's not necessary to go for any of them. Usually players always aim for the starting Eidolons, but for Feixiao, her E2 or E1 aren't as impactful as something like Firefly's E1 or E2, which completely changes her playstyle. Sure, it's not like they are completely worthless. If you do manage to get her E2, goddamn she's gonna go berserk. But still, she's completely fine at E0. And that's why I can't justify anyone pulling for dupes. But then again, it's your account, and you do you, my friend. If you have spare Jace, then go for it. It's just from a meta and overall value perspective, her Eidolons aren't really that worth it in my opinion. Unless you are a spender. If you are, well then, you can do whatever you want with your Jades. By the way, if you're enjoying the content, please consider subscribing, as it does help this channel grow and motivates me to make more content for you guys. Now let's dive into her builds, and as usual, relics are first. Feixiao's best relic set is going to be the new Wind Souring Valorous set. This thing gives attack and crit rate, making her easier to build, and it gives ultimate damage boost, which is her major source of damage. And a damage boost is much more helpful than you may think. Since she wants so much crit rate, you'll end up lacking in damage in her overall build, and that consists of crit damage or normal damage boost. So having extra damage boost to make up for that is great. She also gets some extra damage from her kit, which I'll discuss later. There are also some weird interactions with the wind set. And lastly, if you literally don't have a 4-piece ready, just use a 2-piece combo of any of the set that gives follow-up damage. Also, if you have units like Aventurine in your team or Topaz that can apply debuffs on the enemies, the Pioneer set can also be an awesome stat stick, but it's specific and hard to proc the passive. For ornaments, there are only 2 options here. Her best in slot is the new follow-up set that gives crit damage, or her second best, the usual Inner Salsado. Both can work. Just choose which has better substats, as she's one of those units who needs a lot of crit stats to fully function. You can see the damage difference between each set I just mentioned. This time calculations aren't just her personal damage. This time I have a full team with Topaz, Robin and Aventurine, so it's a bit more accurate representation of her actual damage. For stats, as usual, here's a full reference build that you can take a look. Just as I always do, everything calculated here is with an F2P Lightcone and low roll substat relic pieces, so you guys should be able to reach at least this much. For main stats, use a crit damage body as she gets some crit rate from her kit and her Lightcone. For boost, both attack and speed works. I recommend speed at E0, but if you're going for her E2, then an attack boot will net you more damage. Use a wind damage sphere and an attack percentage row. As for stat goals, just try to reach at least 80% crit rate. Otherwise you'll miss some crits here and there, and that won't be fun at all. Now I've said here 150 to 160 crit damage, which is pretty low, at least for current standards, but given the amount of self buffs she gets from her kit and her relics, you won't have to worry about it. Just focus on crit rate. Also, since she already is the second fastest unit in the HSR, you don't have to look for speed stats on her relics. Just a speed boot will give you more than enough speed. A build with super high crit rate and decent attack and crit damage is what you're looking for. Now for the main course, her Lightcones. Well, there already has been many discussions on this topic, and there has been a lot of confusions going around about her signature being absolutely necessary and how good the Herta store Lightcone on her. Well, this time I went ahead and did a whole simulation to find out the most accurate result I could find. So hopefully this helps. Her best in slot is obviously a signature. It provides some much needed crit rate and up to a total of 54% defense signal, which is one of the most stupid shit I've ever heard. Also, one more thing, this Lightcone actually has a super high base attack for some reason. Like usually all 5-star hunt Lightcones have around 582 base attack, but this thing has 635 base attack, and I've already said countless times in my previous videos, don't underestimate attack. As the base multiplier for any damage formula, a simple attack buff can increase the final damage by a lot. Anyways, her second best is going to be Feixiao's Lightcone. It also has a defense down passive, but since it doesn't have any crit rate, you'll have to get that from her relics, which can be hard, and that's why I recommend the F2B Herta store Lightcone. This thing is a massive stat stick for crit rate and attack, and as I just described, attack is one of the biggest factors in increasing one's damage. This Lightcone is just barely behind Feixiao's signature, and it makes building crit rate on her much easier. So personally, I recommend this above all else, if you're not going for her signature Lightcone. Other options like Topaz's Lightcone can also work, but given there's already a better free-to-play option, and this Lightcone's passive will work even if it's on a support, I recommend using this on Topaz herself, or Hunt March or Mose, and use the Herta one on Feixiao. Lastly, for a 4-star option, only Silence Remain at S5 is a beast of a Lightcone. It provides 36% attack right off the bat, and also gives crit rate, making it one of the better options for Feixiao, but only if the condition is met, meaning only if there are 2 or fewer enemies. Otherwise, you lose out on the crit rate. Other options like Swordplay and the Final Victor can be decent options, if you can build around them. You can already see the Lightcone rankings. This time I calculated the damage with full team buffs applied on Feixiao. As I just described, Feixiao and Herta store Lightcone is extremely close, but the Herta store one is easier to build around. As for a signature, it does have an awesome passive, and there's definitely a damage difference between it and the rest, but I don't think it's absolutely necessary. At least not if you have good supports like Robin and Aventurine. The better the supports you have, the less it matters. If you don't have Robin, then I'd recommend pulling for her signature. As for which to get between her Lightcone and her E1, well, both have their pros and cons. If you're just looking for damage increase, then I say go for her E1 and just use the Herta store Lightcone on her. But then again, pulling for her Lightcone is much cheaper, and as I just said, her Lightcone will become more and more necessary the less premium supports you have. If you have the proper Topaz, Robin, Aventurine team, then go for her E1 and you'll definitely do more damage. But if anything changes, her Lightcone will be of more overall value. Personally, I recommend her Lightcone, just because the 54% defense ignore on the ultimate is massive and can be used on future hunt units. Now for her rotations, well, as a damage dealer, there is not much to talk about. Pretty much always prioritize her skill and never use her basic attack unless you run out of skill points. And given how her skill and passive works, she will do one follow-up attack right after her skill and another one when any of her ally attacks the enemy. So her normal rotation will go around like skill and then 2 follow-up attacks every turn. As for her ultimate, you should always get to use her ultimate every 2 or 3 turns. But since she doesn't use normal energy, how fast you get her ultimate back will solely depend on your teammates and how frequently can they attack the enemy. And by that measure, let's finally talk about her synergies. Now, as I and a lot of others have already said, Feixiao wants some premium teammates. Now, I'm not saying she needs them, but she definitely wants them to perform at her best. And I'll go through every one of her premium requirements and their alternatives. For a full Feixiao team, you need a sub DPS, a buffer, and a sustain. For the sub DPS slot, we have 3 options. First is Topaz. She has a damage taken debuff that increases the damage the enemy takes from follow-up attacks by 50%, which is huge. It's like Jiaoshu but for follow-up attacks. She is also one of the more frequent attackers, where Numbi taking turns constantly, Feixiao will be able to generate flying Aureus points faster. Not to mention her personal damage is pretty awesome as well. And if you have her signature Lightcone, well then not only she will do more damage, but also buff Feixiao's follow-up attacks even more. A great alternative to her is going to be our new upgraded March 7th. She is quite like Jade, as she can make a unit of her choice a Shifu, which grants them extra speed and 60% crit damage after she uses her enhanced basic attack. Both speed and crit damage are awesome stats to have for Feixiao, as most of the time, you'll only focus on getting crit rate from her relics, and this extra buffs comes in real handy. Also, if you have some speed on her substats, with the help of this extra speed buff, you can actually use attack percentage on her boots, and that will increase her damage a lot. Also with her E2, March herself becomes quite the follow-up attacker. Not only she attacks pretty frequently, but one more cool thing is that she can reduce the toughness of any enemy if her Shifu has the same element of said enemy. She doesn't have to worry about weakness type. Where you take Feixiao, March herself will be able to do wind toughness damage. She's also extremely skill point positive, which once again a pretty helpful thing for a super fast unit like Feixiao. And lastly, her personal damage is pretty phenomenal, even at E3, and that will only get better in the coming patch, as we'll finally get the rest of her Eidolons, and she has a pretty insane E6. One more awesome unit is going to be the new 4-star Mose. I still haven't talked about him in a video, so you'll have to wait for his build guide. But long story short, he's going to be a pretty close competitor to Topaz for a Feixiao team. He has a debuff called Prey that he applies on a single target, and that target takes 25% increased follow-up damage. Now for context, Topaz has a 50% vulnerability debuff, so it's not as big as her. But if you have his E2, he also increases the crit damage of any attack to the target with Prey by 40%. And not only that, from my testing and from other sources, Mose is going to be one of the most frequent follow-up attackers in HSR, making it so that he will be able to help Feixiao generate a lot more points. Now if you're calculating Feixiao's personal damage, Mose can be a bit better than Topaz because of the faster ultimate generation. But all around, in terms of team damage, I think Topaz is still better, just because of her personal damage. In that aspect, Mose actually does very okay amount of damage, but confirmation will take actual testing after the release. And as I just mentioned earlier, if you have Topaz's Lightcone on her, then she obviously is Feixiao's best teammate. The next slot is a buffer, and here as a follow-up attacker, Robin is by far her best support. Not only she has some extremely insane buffs, like over 1000 attack, and damage boost, and crit damage, and even action advance. The fact that all of this is for the entire team is massive, especially for follow-up attack teams, which usually consist of 2 DPSs. She's also one of those supports that don't need to use their skill every turn. That means once she's SP positive, and her doing basic attack will count towards Feixiao's ultimate point generation. For some alternatives, Ruanmei can actually be pretty decent here. The weakness break efficiency buff might not be as impactful as for a break team, but the rest are awesome, made with the damage boost, or the rest penetration, or the speed. She's also similar to Robin, as she can also do basic attacks, helping Feixiao generate points. And she's also a team-wide buffer. Apart from these two, the rest are just decent at best options. Both Bronya and Sparkle can be pretty good, especially at E4 Bronya, because she gets her own follow-up attack, but both suffer from being a single target buffer in a dual DPS team. Also, Nihility unit like Silverwolf can also be pretty great here. Since both Feixiao and her sub DPS are mostly single target, Silverwolf can actually do a decent job here, but she won't be catching up to Robin or Ruanmei. The last slot is for a sustain, and oh my lord, there is no one better here than Aventurine. I still refuse to pull for him because I don't like his design or whatever, but goddamn he's good. Aside from his infinite shield and crit damage buff, he has a very frequent follow-up attack that does pretty nice damage, and it will also help with Feixiao's ult generation. At this point, you are just looking for units that can do follow-up attacks. Just like we look for units who can apply debuffs faster for Akron, for Feixiao, we want units with follow-up attacks. And sadly, Aventurine is the only sustain that can do that right now. As a general sustain, I do think Fushuan can be pretty good, just for the 12% crit rate buff, but she definitely is not as good as Aventurine. Here's a simple summary of what type of team combination you can use with your Feixiao. All in all, these are just some of the teams that I think are good, but I'm still just saying that from a theoretical standpoint. We still need to see how she performs on release. Maybe we'll get to see some insane combos with units like Yanli or Jade. Who knows? As for my part, these are all the synergies that I could think of, but if you guys have any other ideas, feel free to share them in the comments. Overall, Feixiao is an awesome damage dealer. In terms of power level, I still don't think she's as broken as units like Akron or Firefly, but I'm always open to be proven wrong. We'll wait and see on her release. As for if you should pull for her, I did make a video already on that topic, you can just go and watch that. But TLDR, she's an awesome DPS for players who love to play follow-up attack teams and have units like Robin or Aventurine. If you're one of those, go ahead and pull for her. Or you can be like me and pull for her just because you like her design. And that's all I have for this guide. Holy hell, this was a long video to make, but hopefully you guys find it helpful. If you have any other questions, leave them in the comments and I'll try my best to answer them. Thanks a lot for watching this video, and I'll see you guys in the next one.